Hello. God, yeah. Remember doing this. Remember doing this and not really having any idea what we're doing.
Yeah,
God, everything's creaky.
You say that, but your presumption from last week that everything will be fine.
Everything will be fine. I'm just going to be staring at the levels this whole time. God damn it, now my phone's going off. Fucking didn't turn my phone off. Oh my God. Podcasting. Terrible etiquette.
And now I know why we got so much cold open rustling nonsense.
Exactly.
Ambient noise back in the day.
Dan, we're recording together in person for the first time. I haven't thought about this. A couple years?
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah,
maybe 2 years,
actually.
Over
2 years.
Very weird.
But we're also in like a classic spot. Like,
classic podcast spot.
The listeners have no idea. We've never recorded any of the locations that we... Yeah, they also don't care. But we are in a nice spot. I mean, like... This would, if we did record the podcast, this would make quite a nice,
for the listener.
This is a very classic YouTube podcast studio environment.
I think it's because there's an unpainted brick wall next to us, and I think that's what's kind of giving us the Brooklyn podcast vibe.
Anyway, I'm enjoying it.
This is really nice. We used to do this a lot. It's reminding me of the pandemic, for better or for worse, but we're doing it. Dan, why are we recording together in person? Other than you just
other than the fact that we're in person.
You coming to visit, which is very nice.
Well, I came to visit, but one of the things we were able to tie into my coming to visit was a little trip to Historical Materialism Conference.
2024?
2024, yeah.
As we are want to do apparently now, because we're wannabe academics. As much as we might deny it. Yeah, exactly.
I suppose,
Yeah. We're failing academics. We're failed academics. Really, it's what
I'm long since accepted that.
Beginning this
it's
podcast
quite a
was
relief. I mean, there was an experience of going to a conference. I was just like, I'm so relieved this is not my life.
Yes, I know, absolutely. Yeah, able to be
Nor
there.
would I ever have thrived in it. I don't think. No, I mean, I won't claim to anyway. Be thriving now.
Exactly. I'm not saying I thrived this weekend.
Not saying I'm thriving. In general,
but it was not having to hustle. Not having to go there and be like, "This is my," and sell yourself into the pitchy. We'll get to all of that stuff. But Dodgers won the World Series. That's what we talked. I did do a bumper before the episode, mainly the last episode, to be like, "Oh, I fucked up." It was so funny when you were like, "I don't think you're recording through your microphone," and I was like, "Nah, don't worry about it," and I definitely wasn't. Dodgers won the World Series. Love that.
Yeah, handily.
Still riding high on that. Handily won. And then Donald Trump won the presidency, which is not ideal.
But you got that week,
Yeah, I'm still kind of going back on Instagram and looking up videos to try and relive that moment of the last out. So trying to get some of that happiness back. I don't know. It's still there. I'm still happy. But we figured before we get into the Historical Materialism Conference stuff, because that's what this episode's going to be, we went to 2 different panels. There were hundreds of panels. Maybe not hundreds of panels. There were a lot of panels. Yeah. And we only went to 2. Thousands of people show up to this thing. So we'll get to talking to all about it because we went to a panel that Tom O'Brien from Alpha to Omega organized, all about socialist planning. And then we went to another one all about socialist planning as well, which was very good. And we'll get to all of that and all the people who spoke. But I suppose we should talk about the election. We did say last episode maybe we will talk a bit more about the election when we actually know what's happened. Well, the worst thing happened. I woke up this morning and had a news alert that was like Donald Trump completes his clean sweep of all 7 swing states, which is fucking brutal because he just won Arizona. Not ideal for anybody. I don't really have a whole lot of takes. My take is that it fucking sucks. And that 2 days beforehand, I woke up and I just had a dread, and I was just like, wow, I really hope he doesn't win. In a way that I kind of hadn't, because I was doing the whole cool Marxist, don't worry about it. Whatever, man, ruling class, whatever, but fuck me. Gonna be bad, I think, in ways that, we'll see. And the only other thing is just that I was telling you about this yesterday. I think Trump's first term, I was total first time was tragedy, second time was farce. What an idiot. Of course, it's the fail son who's made all of his money through sketchy real estate stuff, the McDonald's stuff. He's such an absurd person. But now in the second term, I'm feeling well, of course, that's how fascism comes to America. How could it come in any other way? It feels much more serious, feels much more real, and not ideal. That's my take. Not good.
Yeah, no, I'm feeling exactly the same thing. Obviously, it didn't really just didn't want to get to the point where I had to face up to the reality of living in a post-2024 US election world. And you're right, it's scary. And it's strange. I mean, maybe the scariest thing is actually this is normal now.
Yeah.
Like, whatever it is that the politics of Donald Trump represents, all of the horror of it, all of the gaffes of it, all of the jokes, all of the anything, has to be sort of reckoned with as not an aberration, I guess.
Exactly.
And I suppose that the first time it was just like it happened by accident. Not by accident. It happened. Took us by surprise.
Might have been by accident for him. By some accounts, he was like, "Oh shit."
Well, maybe that slip is correct, though, isn't it? Like he's serious about it now.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess the first thing that I should say is I don't have anything to say that nobody else has thought, and I'm not feeling anything that nobody else is feeling. So presuming that somebody cares, we're here to talk about it anyway. The idea now that there's a sort of somewhat coherent group of people coalesced around him with intentions, who have had the time to work out what it is they might like to be able to achieve with a second or multiple more Donald Trump presidencies.
Oh, Jesus. Oh my God.
So that's the scary thing, really, is the sense that there might be good organisation behind this movement now.
It's also feeling a little bit too like, I mean, we say that, and then it's like Robert F. Kennedy is like the health minister, which is just like, oh, okay. Maybe that's it, right? Maybe it's just the typical Republican thing of just like that section of the ruling class gets what they want by sheer incompetence, putting people who are incompetent to intentionally slow the gears of government to just deregulate things so that you can build McMansions in Arizona. You know what I mean? I don't know. It's hard not to feel, I think, too, like a little bit of. Every now and then we talk about periodization. I mean, we spent the whole last episode talking about periodization. I've been doing a lot of thinking recently about, like, I wonder if the neoliberal period is still, like, a thing. I wonder if that's still a thing. The financialization, the heavy, like, just sell, everything like that. One could imagine in 20 years us looking back on this and being like, maybe this is where a new period actually begins, because the neoliberal period run out of things to fully financialize, and now it feels like maybe a different era of quote-unquote late-stage capitalism, where now it's just like, okay, now we're just going to fully use force to squeeze the last bits of profitability out of these last few sectors. And the only way to do that is, everybody's saying like through a strongman or whatever, but it feels maybe a little bit more like, again, just through incompetence and just make sure the state can't do anything other than just pump quantitative easing out, make sure the state can't do anything other than just, pump cops out whenever there are riots. I mean, again, like when we talk about a lot of Marxist, like, periodization, and when we try to like get the data that we need to talk about these things, it isn't really until like 5, 10, 15, 100 years later that you're really able to look back and go, okay, now we have all of this aggregate data. Now we can really talk about periodization. But it does feel qualitatively different to like a Reagan presidency, a Carter presidency, even a Bush presidency. I mean, I say that and it hasn't even started, but it just feels like, I don't know, feels different, I guess.
I mean, also what that speaks to is the sort of mainstream liberal narrative around this election and how they've been discussing it. The expectation that, well, I mean, there are multiple things, right? There is the polling data and all sorts of things which led people to expect it to be closer, or to think that the Democrats might be within a shot of winning it. But also there's the kind of like looking at the conventional metrics to say, well, actually the economy is doing quote unquote well, under a standard analysis. But if we come back to that question of periodization and whether the general differences, political economic differences between existing in a time of financialization as opposed to like an economy based on sort of industrial production, I guess. I think it's probably that distinction which allows for these gross disparities to come about between how the mainstream liberal I don't know, intelligentsia are experiencing the US economy versus how the sort of normal everyday working class people in America are, and how those metrics of good economy don't translate to good living standards, good standard of life for your everyday American, I suppose.
Yeah, you saying that really makes me feel like, oh, then it certainly wasn't like a fluke that someone like Elon Musk was like, pumping up Donald Trump there at like the last few months, like someone who just purely profits off of this kind of financialization and just pure huckster, like, yeah, these are good cars, and then they explode. These are really well made, and the like seats fall off or something, like, and just the selling of all the different environmental
It's a funny intersection, isn't it, of companies that are like tech companies that exist on the financial speculation of investors who have lots of money to put places, and in this present economy don't really know where to put it, so you get these huge like overinflated valuations of these companies predicated on investors hoping they're going to be the next big thing. And then also the sort of like Tesla also benefited massively in my understanding from state investment, sort of like quantitative easing, state planning, like that allowed for the sort of like ultimate profitability of the sort of Tesla electric car kind of thing. So
yeah, I mean, see every like tech company ever.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? But yeah, that is interesting. It feels
the intersection of interests between like weird vibes-based financialization and then also hard-nosed state action kind of thing.
Yeah, that's interesting because it does seem to be like, I know a lot of people in the kind of pundits in California have been kind of panicking about in the lead up to this election, and also maybe a little bit in the last election, tech kind of seemed to be not quite splitting, but it seemed to be like there were a number of big tech names that were actually backing Republicans in a very odd way. California too. Oh my God, California. There were a number of very progressive, we'll say progressive measures on California's state ballot, some of which did not pass and some of which passed, if that makes sense. Like, they were trying to do good things. Some of them were trying to stop good things, whatever. In a way that is just like, what is California's political identity now? I mean, California obviously still voted for Kamala. She got all the electoral college points from California. But yeah, feels a little bit like every election now is so, we were talking about this yesterday, is so like closely fought. And it seems like the electorate is more or less split down the middle. And it's just, I don't know. People are not motivated, obviously, now to vote for the Democrats in an election like this, where everyone's talking about, wow, look how good the economy is under Joe Biden. Exactly like what you're saying. But for people, they're like, this fucking sucks. That now it's like a lot of political identities are being questioned, maybe. And obviously, the Biden administration's actions in Palestine certainly didn't fucking help. All of the, liberals hand-wringing about, like, we can't talk about that now. We just need to get Joe Biden elected. And then, like, 20 million people don't come out to vote for them because they're, like, waging a genocidal war in Palestine. I don't know. It's odd. A lot of things are being questioned. But again, because of the Constitution, because of the way America's set up, there's just no real room for people to do anything other than just not vote when they don't feel that they're getting anything from either candidate. And obviously Republicans will always come out and vote, so not great.
There's a few things that come to mind, like, I mean, just generally questioning why anybody votes in any particular way, and what those motivations are. And I think I, as somebody with a political science background, was always going to try and like overthink, and sort of presume a high degree of engagement with an election like this, whereas actually the engagement might be high, but people don't spend all their time. People don't spend huge amounts of time thinking about politics.
Oh yeah.
And the thing that made me want to say that is to tie that back in with the sort of general breakdown of party allegiance in general. What were people's allegiances to parties in the past predicated on? Probably not much more than what motivates. They probably are no more or less engaged with politics on a day-to-day basis, perhaps, than they ever were. It's just that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. It is odd. I mean, I think we definitely, especially around presidential elections, we kind of take for granted that everybody is really engaged and everybody's watching everything. And then I always go, who are these people that are undecided? But again, it's not so much people that are undecided, it's just people that are like, well, I'm not going to vote. It's like, fair enough, honestly.
I mean,
what are you going to do?
Yeah. I mean, the one weirdest thing that, for some reason, the coverage of the election I chose to listen to on the night of the election, bearing in mind that in the UK, obviously, the time difference is quite serious, so you can't really know what's going to happen beforehand. But anyway, for some reason I ended up listening to The Rest Is Politics' coverage of
I don't know this.
And I mean, it was I feel like actually as mainstream sort of like centrist interpretation of elections go, they were actually well, they were offering quite a good analysis, and two, it was quite a nice insight into how these people were thinking. And from that, one, I've gotten this sense that like this breakdown of the anticipation the economy is doing well, so the Democrats ought to do well, and then a sort of reckoning with why that isn't the case. And also the weirdest thing about that was listening to these people talk about characters like Elon Musk or even like Peter Thiel or something. Like 5 years ago, you'd be on the sort of like. They would have had no idea who any of these people were. This is coming back to like the influence of Silicon Valley and like that group of that California set, I guess. Like that's the scariest thing in some respects for me. It's like that these characters are coming close to power, and then also just like the weird. Like I'd also like to know perhaps what you think of the outsized, oversized, potentially overblown influence of like the right wing grifter podcaster is in all of this. Whether it's like like again hearing these people talk about Joe Rogan as like important people, or like how like weirder still like fringe right wing Twitch streamers that now everybody knows the name of, you know. It's just,
I mean, it's weird. Because,
maybe it's not important. Maybe it's not real and not important. And the vast majority of people weren't influenced by.
I don't know. I think we're still kind of waiting on like all the numbers to come out, because we're not recording this like close to when this episode comes out. We're recording it like about a week before, and I don't know. I think. Supposedly a large number of like 18 to 29-year-olds did slide right and vote for Trump in a way that hasn't particularly happened or just not vote in a way that hasn't particularly happened in a lot of recent elections. I always am like very hesitant to be like, this is purely ideological, but then it's like when you talk to anybody about why they voted like they did, it does seem to be purely ideological, unless it's what we're talking about, you know, everyone telling them that the economy is great and it's actually not for normal people. I don't know. These days, honestly, maybe more so than 2016, I'm ready to put more importance on the like how everything is just a little bit fascist now. Maybe I sound like an old man, but it's like, again, you turn on like any fucking podcast, any mainstream podcast, any mainstream YouTube video, there are like 2 fucking good Warhammer YouTubers that aren't just outright fascists. Like in 2016, a lot of those people were just openly Nazis. And maybe now they're kind of just more like center-right to like Trump-right people. But that's still just as dangerous. Well, not just as dangerous, obviously, but it's still really dangerous. And like, I do feel like if you, God, I do sound old, but it's like, I do feel like if you talk to any like younger person, they're influenced by the shit in a way that is scary. Because it's like, you know, we get a couple hundred people listening to our podcast. We're not exactly the biggest podcast out there, but like, there are a number of left-wing streamers, but they feel a little bit more countercultural, which is maybe good. But the regular cultural stuff does just seem to be Joe Rogan having Donald Trump on his podcast, having, and that's the biggest podcast in the fucking world. Like, I don't think we can like imagine how big Joe Rogan's podcast is, and like all of the streamers that are just a little bit like incel-y and a little bit like racist, like, or just as bad as obviously the Joe Rogan stuff. He's not going to come out and obviously be like, you know, I'm a racist or whatever. And I didn't see any of his Donald Trump interview because I don't give a fuck. But just the fact of engaging with these people in a way that feels qualitatively different than when they have Bernie on, for just to be like, see both sides. But like, I don't know. Maybe a lot of it has to do with like alienation. Presumably a lot of it does. But it's a feedback loop. You know, obviously people are alienated, and that creates a space for these things. These kind of like like right-wingification of everything cultural. But it's also the reverse, right? Where it's like those cultural things will then turn around and make people just a bit more fascist and reinforce these ideas that they have. So anyway, we're reading something from the Frankfurt School today, Dan. Yeah, I don't know. It's grim.
Yeah,
I'm coming back to that. It's all a bit grim.
Yeah. And the saddest thing is I feel like all the takeaways you could have now, you could have said in 2016. Not you in particular, but anyone. It's like, the Democrats' failure to engage with, like, the majority of Americans, or to have an economic and political analysis that could reach out to people.
Yeah,
and the left's inability, perhaps, to... Yeah. I don't know who the left are in this.
Yeah, exactly.
And I suppose things have happened to the quote-unquote left in its broadest possible terms in the past 8 years, so... Yeah. It's not like an effort hasn't been made
Bernie
to
did
to have reach.
Yeah, exactly. Bernie did do an "I told you so" post on Instagram. It was like, "I told you this was gonna happen." It's like, okay, thanks, Bernie. But yeah, I don't know how much else there is to say, other than, on one hand, it does feel like liberals are slowly starting to come around to the idea that they can't just blame the electorate all the time just because of how fucking stomped Kamala got. Like, if it was close, I think it would maybe be worse. Just because the liberals would be like, we should have had the insane, like, fascist guy from Pennsylvania be the Kamala's running mate. But, like, on the other hand, I don't know. There's still this idea that's very pervasive amongst the, like, liberal left. Not liberal left, just, like, amongst liberals. Maybe amongst, like, progressives, too. That, like, okay, 4 years, but once Trump goes away, it'll all be fine. And it's just like, bruh. It's like, right, the falling rate of profit, I'll have you know, that's clearly not going to happen. I mean...
How long can you how long can you wait for a fictitious idea of normalcy to return?
Well, forever.
Like,
until they just side with the
normal
fucking
has never existed, and it's not coming back.
So that's what people said this about Bush, right? Yeah. Where they were like, listen, once Bush is gone, it'll all be fine. And then it's like, cut to, like, we only left Afghanistan, like, a few years ago. Like... And then we get Trump. It's like, these interests aren't going to go away. Like, if anything, they're going to get worse. And I will say, the last thing I'll say on this is that I feel like climate change is having an enormous impact in a way that we don't necessarily realize. Obviously on immigration, in terms of, like, immigrants from Central and South America, mainly Central America, but then also just in terms of, like, I don't know. I bring up, like, developers a lot about how different businesses that are getting squeezed because of, they're not able to act in profitable ways due to climate change. In California, a lot of this has to do with, like, the agricultural industry. And, like, last year, I think it was, like, several million acres had to go completely unused because there was just no groundwater for people. And I mean, there was groundwater, but the state had to step in and be like, we can't use it to grow fucking almonds. You know what I mean? We need this for, like, actual people. And, they were like, goddamn big government telling me what to do. Feels like a lot of that, like, in terms of a ruling class anger, that's where things are coming from, in terms of, like, support for Trump. And then also they're able to just, make immigrants into boogeymen, like, as they always do, in ways that are not particularly useful, especially because the liberal response to that is, like, I don't know, I don't want to sound callous, but it's like a bit of a bleeding heart one, where it's like, these poor people, we just need to help them and put them into shelters and give them low-paid jobs, as opposed to one that is, like, properly trying to find the roots of why are people actually, like, trying to come from, well, it's pretty obvious why people are trying to come from, like, somewhere like Syria, but, like, why are people trying to, like, come from Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, all of these different places? None of these people actively want to leave their homes. Let's, like, let's maybe try and figure out a way that gets to the root of these issues. As opposed to kind of just, I don't know, treating them like kids, I guess. But that's not going to happen anytime soon, so we'll see.
Yeah, and I guess it never occurred to me, but the question of, like, quote unquote working out how to integrate these people, I don't mean culturally, I just mean economically, I suppose, into Western countries like the US or whatever, should then raise the question of, well, how do we organize our countries as well? Like, why do we only have why can we only imagine inserting them at the lowest possible rung and have them be have why is our response so limited, and why are our moral convictions as to what we should do for these people so so particular, I guess.
Yeah, well, it's also just like we can't put aside. We'll also just say large amount of Americans are incredibly racist, misogynistic, transphobic, queerphobic, just like very xenophobic. I think that's probably why they voted for Trump at the end of the day, honestly. So, yeah. Grim.
Yeah.
We'll see. I had like a fleeting moment where I was like earlier last year where I was like, man, maybe this like far-right populist thing, maybe it is kind of on its last legs because it just can't really do anything. We'll see. But now it just seems like it's ping-ponging back and forth between people being sick of them and voting in liberals, and then people being sick of liberals and voting in them, and it doesn't particularly seem to be. And, you know, obviously when the fascists are in power, they're going to crank everything to the right. They're going to crank the liberal, like, the possibilities that they're able to do in government to the right. So it doesn't feel like it's going away.
Yeah.
And I don't know why I expected that it would have.
Yeah. So. I mean, maybe the ultimate scariest thing is, do we ever reach a point where the majority of people just like, is it a good thing or a bad thing when the majority of people get to the point where they're not even willing to believe anybody's promise of change? You know, like my supposition is mostly what happens is people just out of desperation or hope or some combination of both, like choose to believe somebody's promise that they're able to fix something. When I imagine like a radical left trying to pitch itself to the majority of people, I don't know whether our hopes aren't being destroyed by the constantly being let down by the fact that the majority of people are constantly being let down by everybody else's political pitch kind of thing. So.
Yeah, but I mean, again, also like it would if only it were so easy.
Yes,
because it's like, you know, I don't know. It's like I've been telling you this. Reading Riot Strike Riot fucked me up. It's pissed me off in a real way because it's like, well, the material conditions for like a left political project are like industrial like accumulation, and we certainly don't have that. And financial accumulation certainly hasn't shown itself to do anything other than just piss people off, make them not vote, and loot every couple of years. So, and I don't think that's leading to a commune, unfortunately. Sorry, Joshua Clover. So we'll see. Maybe this new period will usher in a new God. God. We'll see. It is what it is. That's what I'm taking away from it. It is what it is. Anyway, we went to the Historical Materialism Conference. How long was that? It was about 30 minutes.
Well, we'll
put a timestamp.
We'll cut that, yeah.
Went to the Historical Materialism Conference, like we said. This was a few days ago, and we went to a few of the socialist planning panels, the first of which was organized by Tom O'Brien. We'll probably be talking about that one, I would imagine, a bit more. That one had Freddie O'Driscoll, who people might know from like lefty extended circles, Nick Rogers, who we've read for the show before, the IDA, 3 people from the IDA, which is like a labor time group in Germany. Yeah, we've spoken about them a few times, I think. And then a presentation by Donal, but delivered by Tom. I think that was it for that panel. I think it was 4 people, yeah. Very good. It was all very, very good. And the cool thing is that this panel was all organized, like I said, by Tom, and none of the people there, as far as I can tell, are academics, which is really, really cool because, yeah, Dan and I stuck out. Maybe like a sore thumb. Maybe that's because we snuck in. Maybe it's because we just clearly weren't academics. But it was really cool to be in this academic space, which is kind of where Marxism lives these days, and be discussing it with people who are just come to these ideas because they're interested in it. And they're not trying to really like sell themselves necessarily for a PhD or something like that, or for a new book deal. It was just like these people genuinely care about this stuff in a way that was really refreshing.
Yeah, it was really fun. I mean, the first thing to say is for me, it was just nice to be around people who are talking about these ideas. And as you say, people not necessarily from an academic perspective, but just because they care, because these are the interests that they've chosen, because they're working toward propagating these ideas, and they're engaged in their communities or in this work because they want to see the world radically transformed.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
it's not. Yeah, it's just it is reassuring to be around that. Around that passion for ideas and. And yeah, it was good. It was great. It was great. And then, it's nice to see. I think my general understanding is that this year there were more panels on economic planning than there have been in the past. It's sort of been an absent topic from historical materialism. I mean, I don't claim any great understanding. It's the first time I was there, and whatever. I mean, one of the interesting things about Tom's panel was the idea that these ideas were being introduced to people who hadn't seen them before. Like, I sort of went into it imagining that, of course, everybody's read the fundamental principles of communist production and distribution. These are like this is the common understanding that everybody has, and this is where we're working from. But no, like that these panelists were willing to pitch these ideas to people who perhaps haven't come across them before.
Yeah, there was some heckling.
It's good work.
And also, I mean, this first one was organized by Tom, but also I think broadly there were 3 socialist panels also organized by INDEP. People will put a link to INDEP, something like that. It's something that Ferdia and a few other people kind of in our broader like lefty extended universe that we know have kind of been working on. It's like a international thing for basically talking about planning, democratic economic planning, I think is what the last 3 letters stand for. So it was all very good. First panel was by Ferdia O'Driscoll. I feel like this is one that we might actually just talk about the most, because this was really like, it was something that, first of all, it was interesting. All of these talks were very interesting, but we've never really come across the ideas that Ferdia was talking about. Necessarily, at least in terms of like talking about them on the show. I just never really come across them, period. But the name of Ferdia's panel was Goal Alignment in Post-Capitalism Using Self-Determination Theory. That was one of the shorter, more easy to understand titles of the panels. And it was really, really good. Basically, what Ferdia was doing was taking... he gave like a 15-minute presentation on ideas that he has around using psychological self-determination theory, but basically like kind of self-actualization, self-fulfillment, the things that people need to feel psychologically balanced or happy or motivated, to motivate them to align their goals together in a socialist economic world. Because obviously what we're trying to do is create the conditions where, we've spoken about this before, where like your individual actions, the things that you see as best for you, and that you're motivated to do out of self-interest, are the things that are best for society, right? That's kind of part of what communism is making it so that those two things align. And that was the alignment, the goal alignment part of Ferdia's talk. And it was very, very interesting. As soon as he started talking about psychology, I was like, Dan's going to be all over this.
Well, yeah, there's a few things to say. I mean, I guess, what was the title of the... of Tom's panel overall? It was like I think it was like something to do with like organizing, like economy self-directing, and so in some respects all of the emergent control, there we go, very cybernetic title. And I guess the first thing I'd like to say is just sort of tie things around that idea, because there's an extent to which all of these presentations were around how you could have something approaching like workers' control of production, mostly directed toward the level of the firm in some respects, particularly like Donald's presentation given by Tom about the Toyota production method. One of the flaws one of the things that this whole experience of going to historical materialism and seeing these 2 panels has made me think about is the distinction that sometimes, or the sort of contradiction that's existed in my brain around thinking about questions of planning, around our reading of the Fundamental Principles book, is I sometimes get stuck in the trap of being like, okay, here is a technically feasible method for planning an economy. We'll just like we'll account, we'll do labor time accounting, we'll use that metric, it'll do all the sort of, it'll give us the information to understand the transfer of goods through an economy and how production and consumption are going to be directed. And then it's very easy to sometimes I feel, for me anyway, to hand wave away questions of like, what will be the human motivation to actually engage in these new social relations that are being proposed, and I sometimes fall into the trap of being like, well, these will just be the new social relations of socialism, blah 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 blah.
And we'll force them
as long as we put the technical apparatus into place somehow, God knows how that's going to happen.
That's the easy bit.
Yeah. And it allows me a sort of naive optimism sometimes, just like, oh yeah, it'll all be fine. We know how to do it. And so, in a very unroundabout way, getting back to the point, a lot of these, in both of these panels, in some ways, what was really being raised is this question of how do we account for and how do we justify our expectation that human beings are adept to exist potentially in this new mode of production, and in that light, like Ferdier's introduction of self-determination theory as a particular schema for describing, in essence, like an interpretation of human nature, right? Sort of another set of core values that human beings have to have facilitated in their lives to feel the most fulfilled. It's quite easy to be made to feel very alienated in work by listening to that presentation, because it's like trying to work out how many of these fundamental needs are being met for me in what ways. So I suppose maybe we can go through it. Like I don't know whether I'm going to get the specific terminology right, but self-determination theory and its sort of basic analysis, as I understand, sort of hinges on three principles of what human beings need to get out of their activity. And they are autonomy, in the sense of feeling like you're choosing the activity that you're doing, not necessarily needing to be independent from others, but
that bit, just really quickly on that, he had one line that was, autonomy is not independence or isolation. Mm-hmm. For a second I was like, well, obviously it's not isolation but independence. I was like, that's a really interesting idea. He's absolutely right. It's like autonomy in this kind of is like, I think one of the fundamental principles of like this group of people giving these talks that are like systems theory influenced economic planning, is that like it's not anarchism where everyone's just doing anything that they want. That's not what autonomy is. But it's also very obviously not just central planning. And when he was like, autonomy is not independence, it's like this idea that you're being given the autonomy to work things out how you want to, but you're being given a set of goals to work towards. I thought that was really early.
Mm-hmm. I mean, in some ways it speaks to the sort of emergent nature of the sort of like cybernetic features of this analysis, I guess. Like, we somehow have to develop ways of allowing individual human behavior to sort of agglomerate into one like collective social body, I guess. And we need to work out both technically what kind of like democratic representation is going to be most appropriate for facilitating that, but also then sort of like with this question of psychology, like what kind of human psychology, what understanding of human psychology do we need to have to
make people feel like they want to go to work and they're being fulfilled by it. Self-determination. It's good. Yeah, because it's like the whole general idea is like, you don't want to completely iron out the like idiosyncrasies of concrete labor, right? Like even in socialism, you want to recognize that that's actually like the thing that creates like a high variety system for figuring out problems. You also just want to morally give people like a bunch of autonomy. But also you're clearly working towards goals. It's goal alignment is kind of the whole point. How do you do that in like a moralistic, but also like sound in terms of systems theory way? It was very, very good. And you generally don't hear like a lot of Marxists when they talk about planning, talk about anything like this. And using psychology. Yeah, it was very good. Very, very good.
Yeah. So yeah, for self-determination theory is a requirement that you be able to work autonomously. You have to feel competent in your work, and you have to feel like communally connected to the people that you're working with.
That just sounds like communism, honestly.
Sounds great.
It's like, it sounds like what Marx is talking about when he talks about the things that you're working towards in higher stage communism, where it's like, work becoming life's prime one, where, you're not just a fisherman, you're a fisherman and a schmuck in the day or whatever. Like, it's all of these things where what Ferdia was talking about really did just seem to align like with what Marx is talking about the point of communism. Obviously, the point of communism, making production more rational or whatever, or, but to a certain extent, maybe if you could say what is communism and just like, if you could say one thing, to Marx, it would certainly seem to be just de-alienating labor and how that just builds the creative potentials of all of humanity. And it seems like Ferdy was basically saying that needs to be baked into the cake from the beginning, because that's how you get people like, we'll talk about some of the labor time stuff later, but like one of the big criticisms that people have of labor time is like, whoa, so you do this, people are just going to shirk work. Ferdy is like, well, actually, like, you create the environment where people want to go to work, because you're not just going to work and making shoelaces on the production line for 8 hours. You're going there and like, you're recognizing the like concrete good that this is making society. You're recognizing that you have an impact. You're recognizing that the goals, like, here's what it's going to do. Here's why you need to do it. You're obviously not producing. It might just be as simple as realizing that might be as simple as you're not producing for exchange, you're producing for use. The things that you're making are going to get used by people just like you. And then the other thing that he mentioned that I thought was really interesting was how he was like, generally people have found that rewards and punishment are generally actually not a very good way to motivate people at all. And it's punishment, that's fairly obvious. But rewards, I thought that was really interesting too, where he was like, maybe actually just don't reward people, because, if you want to take the next step, you really want to get rid of that, like, competition, and just have, rising tide lifts all boats, and have people really feel like their work is making a difference, and that, obviously nobody's going to be in competition in socialism. So seems easy to do.
Yeah, it seems for this sort of set of theories for human motivation, there's a distinction made between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. And this is all about the intrinsic motivation, the motivation that comes from within, that makes people want to participate to their fullest. And anything which is like perceived to be an external motivation, whether it's a reward or a punishment, I presume there is at least some theoretical research that sort of, backs up this interpretation of human behaviour. Maybe one day we can get down to looking into some of that. That'd be fun. But yeah, like it's quite a provocative statement, but like a compelling one to say. Well, maybe it's more broadly like, and there are ways in which this relates to some of the things that were said by other panelists when they were answering similar questions about a human beings' motivation to participate in a system like this. But it's just all got to be self-chosen, and it can't be about reward structures. It can't be about, I do this because I need to get some sort of particular outcome from my participation.
Yeah.
And I suppose it keeps one constantly engaged, right? If it's just about like small short-term rewards, it means even if you are being motivated to sort of like pursue certain outcomes, it means that like as soon as you get that reward, potentially the sort of like willingness to engage is ended. And I suppose also like a reward structure incentivizes perhaps a lot of negative behaviors in terms of like striving toward personal rewards rather than like the collective benefit of the whole endeavor kind of thing.
Yeah. Again, I would like, just going off that, I was really struck by just how much of this seemed to be meshing with Marx's theories of like, what communism actually does to the human psyche and about what higher stage communism is. And, to a certain extent, what Freddie was saying was a lot of it was just like, you need to meet people's basic needs, and then things will definitely change. And we've talked about this a lot on the show before, where it's like, listen, just make food for the most part free, have cantinas where people can go and eat, take care of their shelter, take care of all the basic needs. And that is like a huge step in the right direction of people recognizing that when they go to work, what they're actually doing, which is like helping to build society for everybody. Very, 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 very good. Anything else to say on Ferdia's thing? Maybe we've got to have Ferdia on the show one of these days, because it's very good. All right, the next one was Nick Rogers gave another 15-minute presentation on a paper that we've actually read for the show before, so maybe we won't go into it too much. But this was Nick Rogers, who's a legend, seems like a very, very nice guy, very cool. He gave a presentation on his paper, Reflections on the Economics of Socialism. And once again, his stuff is just phenomenal. He is like very eloquent. He's someone that is very like, I don't know, just sees through a lot of the kind of bullshit academic infighting in a lot of these debates and just gets to the point of like, why are we even having this stupid debate? The main thing that he talked about and that we talked about for the show before was that there's no reason at all to make a distinction between what's called ex ante and ex post planning, which is, you know, ex ante, you plan everything out that you need to before. And it's like, God damn it, the amount of like quote unquote socialist or like Paracani type planning models where it's like everybody gets a survey and lists everything they're going to want for the next year. It's like, why would anybody take you seriously for that? And then the ex post stuff, it's like, you know, people talking about maybe more market socialism-y type stuff where you, I don't know, in capitalism, you like your investment is valorized, you make your profit, and then you realize, okay, here's how much demand there was. Let's base our next production cycle off of something like that. Nick Rogers is making the point that no firm does purely one or the other in capitalism. No firm will do purely one or the other in socialism. And when he says it like that, it's just like, why are people having this debate?
Yeah,
it's so
we've got a lot, like, we've created a dichotomy that absolutely should be dissolved. Doesn't make any sense. I don't know whether it's something that's just been internal. I mean, we could go into another critique of academia, right? Where maybe just people have committed themselves to certain particular academic positions. It also doesn't help that some of these things are tied quite heavily to particular political traditions, right? Those people on the left who are defenders of the Soviet Union for one reason or another might be more committed to this sort of like command and control ex ante idea of how you do a planned economy. And we might also just be stuck in like the sort of economic socialist planning debates of the 1920s or whatever, the 1910s, and it's just like we're well over 100 years beyond. Like,
yeah, I was going to say, it feels like one of the main reasons is also that the workers' movement stagnated and people are just complaining about things that don't actually matter. It's like Marx's quote about sects, right? Where it's like, as soon as the workers' movement takes off again, all of the sects are just suddenly reactionary, right? It's like, right now, there's no workers' movement taking off and they feel reactionary.
Yeah. I mean, maybe I should be more kind and be like, well, there's an extent to which planning, as it has ever been attempted by socialist regimes, has failed. Well, I say that like the Soviet Union did exist
for a while.
Like,
It certainly did.
So I guess I can't say failure.
Failed in terms of what we would want.
Yeah, and we never managed to meet or evolve into what the aspirations of socialists are, I guess, or socialists were. And I'm faced with that, and faced with the collapse of the Soviet Union, the collapse of really existing socialism, the experience of this existing in sort of like a triumphant capitalist neoliberal world for however long, like had led people into certain thought patterns and paradigms, and it's now time to challenge some of these.
Yes, exactly. And Nick has a very good point where he's just like, for a long time, people will just, when, you know, planning debates become in vogue again, there will be a certain group of people who are very loud talking about central planning, which is just like so stupid. But then he's like, the response to that is always market socialism. And he's just like, there's no need to do that. And, you know, Nick Rogers is definitely, I don't know if he's coming out of like a very similar counsel-y background. I have no idea. But a lot of his ideas certainly mesh well with the kind of fundamental principles stuff. It's interesting. Maybe we'll talk about this when we get onto the IDA. Maybe we can just get onto the IDA stuff now. So to a certain extent, the kind of fundamental principle stuff, you can kind of just define it as a market. Like, it's not market socialism, but it is kind of just like you're using signals of people, like, you know, buying things with their labor tokens to, like, influence planning, whatever. Mm-hmm. Anything else to say on Nick Rogers?
Not now. I think no. I mean, I think like all of these ideas merge together. So exactly. As we speak, it becomes a bit more blurry as to who said what and who's influencing what. And,
well,
which speaks to the coherence of this panel and this collection of ideas and the willingness to work toward building like a new paradigm for thinking about these questions.
Then let's get on to the next one. There are two more. So the IDA, which is 3 German words, is a group of people who are really influenced in Germany by the fundamental principles, by Jan Appel, who I found out, speaking to them, it's actually Jan Apple. They were like, it's not Appel. They were like, I don't know why you say that.
Apple.
Yeah, and Tom was like, I don't know why I say that either. They're like, it's Apple. I was like,
we've learned a mispronunciation. Okay.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Tom. But they were like, that's not how you say it in Dutch either.
Apple.
Jan Apple. Yeah.
Okay.
Jan Apple.
There we go. I mean, that's a lot easier, really.
It's way easier, yeah. So their presentation was labor time calculation and firm-based planning. Basically, it was just a crash course in the fundamental principle stuff. Very, very well put together. It was very enlightening. It was good to be reminded of a lot of these ideas. And one of the things that I thought they did really well was they framed this entire thing, this discussion of Jan Appel's book, by saying that to them, Marxism is focused too much on critique, right? It's too negative. It's a critique of political economy. Of course you need that. But also to them, if you actually want to be a Marxist, and this is like very reminiscent of Paul Maddock and, like Councilists in general, the whole point of Marxism is to change the world. This is, Marx's last thesis on Feuerbach. This is praxis. This is the idea where they're like, to them, that is trying to actually really conceive of how socialism would work. It was interesting because I just read something where it was basically trying to make the argument that Marxism is like a negative critique by its very nature, and that's all it can be used for. But then this is like, no, but actually, we need to be figuring things out, not just criticizing like Adam Smith, who died several hundred years ago. You know what I mean? I thought that was a really good way of framing it because, I don't know, we've spoken about value theory a lot.
Yeah. I mean, we have really internalized on the left this idea that like we shouldn't be making prescriptions for what socialism should be. And I guess in the sense that like the proletariat, the revolutionary proletariat and the sort of like the people of the socialist future, like will make their own decisions. Of course they will.
Yeah.
Like it's like almost a truism. Like we don't need to limit our capacity to think and to propagandize ideas and to make interpretations and predictions about what the future is and what the future ought to be. Like there has to be. I mean, like there will be the total like change in like form of the two modes of production, but also we do have to somehow bridge those two as active political agents.
Yeah.
We have to be, and again it comes back to like a question of like engaging real human beings. Like why is anybody going to be motivated to a political project that actually has nothing to say about the concreteness of the world that we want them to engage in trying to create.
And also, I just realized when they were talking about this, I was like, oh yeah, we're all workers too.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm not going to put myself on a pedestal and pretend not to be a worker and be like, I'm not going to dictate to the workers what to do. Because it also comes back to the idea that we spoke about way long time ago when we interviewed Cliff Connolly from Cosmonaut, where he was basically talking about hegemony. And he was like, listen, somebody's going to have hegemony, and no matter what political movement you're talking about, their ideas, their ideology is going to have hegemony. So you do need to actually fight for what you believe to be the correct one. Otherwise, you're just kind of ceding the question and not really helping anybody. And combine that with the fact that like everybody there wasn't an academic. I'm not saying that like academics aren't workers, right? But like it felt very, I don't know, felt very real. Like these are people that I come into contact every day, and they had all of these ideas, and I was like,
cool. I've always found it very hard to like find a way of integrating the two things, being a worker, being a normal human being who just engages people, and also being somebody who's interested in this particular stream of academic thinking. How do I bring those two aspects together?
It's funny because I do think that there is a line when people start being like, and here's how this specific aspect of social life will work. Here's how this specific aspect of political life under communism will work. It gets a little bit like, okay, this is kind of just a fantasy, and now you are actually just dictating to people. But when we're talking about the fundamental principles of communist production and distribution, you would certainly want these ideas to be debated, and the idea that you find the most appealing to have hegemony before there is any kind of like, revolutionary style scenario. So it makes sense. Yeah. And then the only other thing I'll say on the IDA stuff, again, because this is stuff that we've spoken about a million times, other than to say that the three people who were doing it were all lovely people, they framed this whole discussion when they started talking about the actual book by saying, why is it that we think that labor time planning is the way to go? And they were like, well, the first reason is because society needs to be able to compare different productions. They need to have a metric where they can say, something is going on here, this one is not particularly productive, something is going on here, this one's really productive. How can we, again, like rising tide raises all boats, like one of the first things a socialist movement is going to want to do is rapidly develop certain parts of the world that capitalism has kept underdeveloped, right? And you're going to need to have a specific way to do that, and you're going to need an economic measure to do that. And the metric that they say is the best thing to do is just, basically how hard is it to do? It's labor time. And they took pains to emphasize, everybody, and when they did the questions at the end, seemed to just not hear this at all, but they took pains to emphasize, and you can do a bunch of other stuff too, but this should be the base. You can put on ecological rents, Tom talked about that. You can put on carbon taxes, you can do all sorts of different stuff. You can do happiness metrics, you can do all of this, but at the end of the day, it should probably be based on labor time, because you need something that is qualitatively the same amongst all kind of areas of production, which I thought that was a really good way of framing it. Nobody seemed to pay attention to that. Everybody seemed to just go, but I don't know why you'd use labor, but it was
I mean, that was the most frustrating thing. And all I want to talk about now, after hearing that, is the second panel that we went to.
Yeah.
Because that labor time accounting was sort of thrown away as like, because so much of the discussion in that, which I try and avoid getting too bogged down in, was around finding the right metric or having multiple metrics for analysing the work of an economy, the work of society.
Well, should we just talk about that one really quick? Let me see if I can find... That's the third one. What day was it? It was Friday, right? Yeah. I've got the big-ass fucking thing here. What time was the panel?
This was in this group somewhere.
This group.
Or maybe on the next page.
Okay, so here it is. It's Socialist Planning 2, Participation and Rationality Post-Capitalism. Donal and Tom, we will get back to talking about yours in a moment. But this was three people. It was supposed to be four. It was Aaron Benenev, Pat Devine, and John O'Neill. And yeah, basically this one was all about, as you say, kind of trying to figure out everything other than labor time. And how do you basically, what was the name of one of them? It was like, just fucking shut the book. It was like rationality without optimization, and about all three of these people basically talking about there are other things that you would want to maximize for other than labor time. How can we do that? It was a bit more philosophical, I'd say.
Yeah. I mean, it was my response to it was, it's sort of coming off what you were just saying about the IDA. Like they were looking for, quite rightly, I suppose, like seeing capitalism as like fixating on one particular metric of value production that directs this, sort of allows people to decide what is the most is the ultimate arbiter of what's perhaps the most profitable decision to make if you are competing amongst particular set of economic or political options that you have. They were trying to sort of like propose a system for both, where they would, in different ways, in different presentations on that panel, propose a way for balancing different demands of particular polities or particular interest groups, and then also to move away from fixating on one metric and to somehow sort of like think about the world in terms of multiple metrics of analysis for cost and benefit for weighing certain decisions. I can't remember who it was. One of them sort of like lumped labor time in with those different forms of
measures,
measuring whatever. To which my response was exactly what you were just saying about the IDA. Like, no, labor time presents a particular way of analysing. It's a very simple metric. It allows us to understand political, economic production, economic distribution. It allows us just a simple metric for accounting for all types of production across the sort of the production system. And one of the interesting things that was said, because when we read the Fundamental Principles book, we I think we came away with this idea that, like, okay, well, I did anyway, came away with this sort of like split analysis of, okay, we have a particular type of economic organization that we're going to do through labor time accounting, and then there is also going to be some kind of political system of communism. Like, an acceptance that politics isn't going to disappear, that like differences in opinion as to what should be done aren't going to disappear. And obviously labor time accounting doesn't give you some kind of like moral valuation, or like it doesn't tell you what the best thing to do is. It just in my understanding anyway, it just gives you like data for analysis. It allows the proletariat a type of understanding of how the economy is working that we just don't have. It overcomes, under capitalism, it overcomes a lot of the mystification of capitalism and gives us a degree of clarity which actually allows for conscious planning. And my thinking whilst I was listening to this presentation was like, all of this stuff just falls under the category of politics. This isn't this isn't planning, economic planning as I understand it. This is the politics of communism. What will politics look like under communism? And then Aaron Benenov basically came out and said, I've decided that I wanted to think about the politics of the politics isn't going to disappear, and how is it going to be organized? Oh, okay, the intention is to talk about the politics of communism. But it would be nice that distinction. I don't know whether I'm right to want to put that distinction in place, but it didn't seem articulated in.
Well, I don't even know, because I think the first guy's presentation, whose name I don't remember. I don't think it was Devine.
That was Pat Devine, I think.
Oh, it was Pat Devine.
Yeah, I think.
Then I mean the other guy. The guy the kind of happy philosopher guy. Not Pat Devine, not Aaron Benenov, the third guy that I said. It seemed like he was actually trying to make a point that this stuff should be considered in economic planning.
Okay.
Because he was making all of these different like logical, philosophical arguments about like when you're thinking about building a dam or knocking a dam down or something like that, you need to be weighing, sure, the labor time, but you need to also be weighing, what does it do to the steelhead trout trying to go upstream? What does it do to happiness? Will it destroy people's houses? All of this different stuff. And it was funny because he was making an argument that like labor time can be too, if you base planning solely on labor time, it can be too technocratic. And what he was saying, I was like, this is just pure technocracy, because he was saying you don't want to have a situation where like you're just trying to optimize for one thing. You want to be optimizing for like a million different values, right? Which is absolutely correct. But then I was kind of just thinking, well, okay, but who's making the decision which one of these things that we're optimizing for? And then when it got to Aaron Benenov, then he was talking about this whole token system for politics and for social causes and things like that, which I appreciate, like someone trying to map out. But it was like, once you include all of these different measures, then it seems like you would have to have one centralized group just making these decisions. Because if you're trying to like quantify all of these different things, I don't know. Obviously, you're going to want a situation in which people can be informed and like democratically vote on these things and deliberate and decide. But that does just seem to be deliberation. I don't know. It is what it is. Hopefully nobody can hear the phone ringing in the background, because that's not going to get picked up.
You're like, maybe it is then an open question, and it's a valuable part of the discussions that were had at this conference, I think, and something for me to take away, for us to take away. Don't want to make it sound like I think that these are two distinct realms of communism, the sort of like economic planning done purely through labor time.
Yeah.
Because obviously an essential part of planning is going to be the only people of interest in this planning there's not the planners, it's not the central planners who are presumably, hopefully not going to exist, nor is it like the computer that's just going to cough out the perfect synthesis of all of these like perfectly weighted wants and demands, the wants of the environment, the wants of biodiversity, the wants of human environment, the sort of like wants of economic needs of the economy, like it's only the human beings participating in whatever sort of self-regulating democratic economic process. And of course they're going to need, I guess these metrics then are going to be valuable for people to have to make these decisions.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think you would still want a situation where you maybe even do the exact mapping out.
We have them now, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Decisions are not made purely on like economic weightings, like,
so much of this, though, and a lot of the criticisms and the questions for the first panel, and then I think this is what the second set of panels was fundamentally built on. It's just a complete mistrust of working people. Like, I hate to say it, sometimes it felt a little bit bourgeois, where it's like, we can't solely use labor time planning. We can't do this. There was a question asked in the first panel where it's like, well, people are just going to shirk off if you do this, if you don't reward them for their productivity. And then in this stuff, it's like, no, you really need to like include, and whether it's prices or whether it's some other weird method of planning, you need to include all of these different factors. You can't trust working people to just decide this shit on their own. And it's like, I don't know. First of all, nobody was paying attention to Ferdia's panel, and nobody was probably paying attention to the IDA's panel because they answered a lot of this stuff. But it's like, I don't know. People aren't stupid. And especially when you create a world that encourages people to be engaged in not just the productive sphere, but in the broader like set of decisions that go around building a society, creating ecological things that you would want, like, people are going to be a lot more engaged and a lot smarter. And these decisions, I feel like you don't need to create a big technocratic system for people to like be like, and if only 15 steelhead trout are able to get upstream, then that lowers the happiness ecological coefficient by 0.15. It's like, you could do that. You could make a presentation for people based on that, but also like, people aren't stupid and they're going to be able to figure this stuff out. You would want presentations like what these people were doing. You would want all of this data to be out there. But if the implication was to maybe include this stuff in price, or to have some sort of weird technocratic system that decides optimization, and I get that that's kind of not the point of what that first guy was talking about, or not the first guy, the second guy, third guy. I don't know. It just kind of, I don't want to fall back on the like, well, people will be smarter, everybody will figure it out. But I do think that like, if the argument there was an anti-solely labor time account of planning, I think they're probably missing the point, because you can do all of this stuff and still have labor time be your one like economic unit of account.
Mm-hmm. I think something that Tom said to us afterwards on reflection of these ideas was that like, you can still, he called them rents, right? But there could be like costs applied to the costs of various products of outcomes of production and objects of consumption that weighted for some of these things if you wanted them to,
I mean, that stuff I like. It does kind of feel a little bit that it's kind of like, well, then what's the point of the price at that point if it's not actually reflecting the direct labor time? But it's a good fallback to have as an answer to a lot of these people where it's like, you could do this. Yeah. You could absolutely have labor time planning and then just add something on top of it. But people would also presumably deliberate and be like, oh yeah, I don't want like the world to end, so we're going to end fossil fuel production. But it may be in a transitionary phase. Yeah, I don't know, whatever. Sure. Anyway, we'll go back to the first panel just to talk really quickly about Donal's presentation, which was done by Tom. So Donal put forward a, I don't know, what do you call it, a thesis, a paper? It wasn't a paper, a presentation, I guess, just like everybody else, on the Toyota production system and on the lessons that it teaches people, basically on like post-Fordism, I should say, and the lessons that it can teach us about how we'd want to organize production in a socialist society. Began with a critique of Taylorism and wound up kind of making the point that capitalism has realized that, an intensification of every aspect of the labor market and treating the labor that gets done in specific firms as, how you kind of treat everything else on a market, like really rewarding productivity and really punishing everything else and really trying to have a hyper-specialized division of labor. Capitalism has actually realized now that that is not the most productive way to do things. And Donal and Tom made the point that certain firms like Toyota have introduced what they call pseudo-communist relations, where they're trying to kind of institute a like, not collectivization of property, but a like, I don't know, a way of kind of like attempting to get rid of class and attempting to kind of create like this bubble where capitalist social relations don't exist in order to create a more productive firm, and how that has actually worked for places like Toyota. There are varying degrees to which this stuff has been implemented versus how it's actually just been talked about. But the kind of points there were we can actually learn quite a bit from the Toyota production system and pull production just in general, and how Taylorist, Fordist methods are not, capitalism has realized we need to move beyond that. It's the typical kind of Marxist thing. The productive forces have developed to a certain point where the, given social relations of our society can't keep up. And that means a revolution's right around the corner, which is good.
I think speaking of these like pseudo-communist relations, I think maybe the fundamental one that it seemed like they adopted to some degree or other was just this simple understanding that like the workers who are at the metaphorical coalface, have the best understanding of how their work is done, how the activity that they do, both singularly or collectively, could be optimized, and then facilitating the ability for them to put forward proposals for like an improved methodology. And then the critique of the Fordist stuff was really fascinating, just like recognizing that Fordism had gone for pure speed and scale, and Toyota, under a particular set of economic limitations, really couldn't mimic the sort of scale aspect of Fordism. Recognized it resulted in a lot of inefficiencies, like a big build-up in stock or
overproduction.
Oh yeah, like potential overproduction in certain areas, and it was really fascinating, this idea of like a production line needing to go at the speed of the slowest person, because if you don't go at that speed, then you build up all these bottlenecks in various places, or particular faults in there's no incentive to investigate problems in both in the production method, but also in faults in the products that are being produced. It's all for speed and scale and get as many products out as you possibly can, rather than recognizing we're only trying to meet a certain level of demand. We only need a certain set of inputs to produce the amount of demand that we have, and we can moderate sort of all portions of the production process to create a sort of more smoother, more well synthesized, well integrated production process.
Yeah, and that, I think, is the overproduction stuff is key, because capitalism's driving impetus will be produce as many commodities in the most productive way in as short amount of time as possible, and then sell them. You know what I mean? Get to the point where you can sell them, create needs. People need fidget spinners, make the advertising department work for its money, right? But again, yeah, you're right. Toyota production system recognized, no, actually it should just be producing for demand. And again, this idea, like what you're saying, of producing the speed of the slowest person on the production line, not only does that get rid of overproduction, but it also, stops these bottlenecks. It also creates a kind of feedback loop where the production line is kind of like self-organizing and has an impetus for everybody, a communal impetus, I should say, for everybody to make each other better and to kind of help each other get better, and to self-improvement, I think, is a phrase that I'm looking for, right? This is kind of one of the main phrases of the Toyota production system: constant self-improvement. People criticizing their own work methods, the work methods of other teams, and really trying to make the entire production line work better. And some of the things that they institute that, Tom and Donald called pseudo communist social relations were job guarantees, equal pay on the production line, no bonuses, or at least no bonuses for productivity. Maybe you get a bonus if you figure out something that would work really well for everybody. And again, these are all the things that make it the opposite of the Taylorist kind of Fordist approach, where you're just working on a production line. And you have all of these time and motion studies where it takes you half a second to turn around like this, but it takes you three quarters of a second to turn around like that. So, you really optimize your movements. It's not really about that. And we came across some of these ideas when we talked about the Volvo plan in Uddevalla in Sweden, about how they would create little work teams that knew how to do everything as opposed to know how to do just one little thing. And it created better products, and it was actually more productive at a certain point for everybody to just kind of, not just be the person that puts the springs on the dashboard or whatever, but they know how to do everything in the car. And obviously that speaks to the fulfillment process of work. And yeah, it was really interesting. And again, just the last kind of thesis behind this whole presentation was that capitalism is now becoming a fetter on itself in terms of the productive sphere, specifically Taylorism and Fordism. But, and this is kind of the Marxist angle of it all, capitalism is not able to do the one thing that would make it, apotheosis of like the most productive machine possible, which is instituting communist social relations. It was very good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as a sort of like a place for the whole panel to end, it was quite a nice case study on some of the things that were said in some of the other presentations, right? So it is quite a good validation of some of the things contained in Ferdia's discussion about not like rewarding individuals, not having a reward-based structure. I think from what Tom was saying, like when there are bonuses, they're sort of collective team bonuses rather than like ones to benefit individuals. Something that they recognized was that like having all of these differential pay structures where people are paid slightly more or slightly less than others create all of these strange resentments that don't like allow a production team to work well together. So and also it speaks to what Nick was saying about the fact that capitalist firms do plan, like recognizing that you have a certain demand to meet and you can't necessarily like, you might do more to like boost the demand for your products, but like having a certain recognition of how the entire economy is working, what products are there for sale already and where you fit into it, is much more than just this simple conception of companies being very blinkered to everything else other than let's get as many products out as possible.
Exactly. Yeah. It was very, very good. Yeah. There was an angry man in the audience who asked a question that was kind of just insulting to Tom up to the end, where he was like, this is entirely rose-tinted glasses. We wouldn't want anything like this in communism. It's private property. And it was just like, well, yeah, that's the whole point, is we don't want private property. But what are you going to do? I don't think I ever want to do any of those presentations because it's just like, I would not know how to deal with that guy. But well done to everybody for great presentations and stuff. The last thing I'll say is that in this panel, there were a lot of objections at the end. Not objections, maybe just questions to the idea of labor time accounting. And they always seem to come back to the same few things. It's, oh my God, I can't read my writing at all. It's ecology is one of the main things, right? How are you actually going to institute? How are you going to tie making a world that isn't just killing itself into the production sphere and not just have it be a political decision? Another thing is the size of industry. This is like degrowth people will ask these questions. How do we actually like slow growth down? Seems like labor time accounting is actually just the way that you do that. But the main thing, as always, whenever you talk about this stuff, is wage differentials. People either say, why would you want everybody to be paid the same? Or there's some kind of like argument for, oh, well, I'm a doctor. You're really going to say that, my labor time is worth the same as like the schmuck administrator, right? And it's like, it's so funny because it's like everybody's a Marxist until you actually start talking about Marxism. And it's like, yeah, that's the point. It's like that is entirely the point of communism, is that you treat everybody's labor the same. But I mean, it makes sense. Maybe it's a bit of like a middle class fear or something like that. But it just always makes me laugh. Without fail, there's always somebody that's like, you can't treat everybody's labor the same, whether they're worried about a Cuba happening or whether they just don't think there's enough motivation. Again, this gets back to what I think the main criticism of this stuff, where it all actually comes from, which is you can't trust working people. Working people are too stupid to do any of this stuff. Nobody would have motivation to become a doctor if they can't have like a McMansion in the middle of nowhere and a Bentley or whatever. Or you can't trust working people to understand, the ecological crisis. And it's just like, it's so bourgeois, all of these fears. And it just left me thinking, even though there was this great panel of a bunch of great people putting forward a bunch of great ideas, I was like, I certainly hope this is a working class revolution, because I don't know if I trust all of the academics to figure it out for us, because a lot of these people are academics and they just get scared. They balk at, putting working people in charge. And it's just funny. It's just like, fuck's sake.
Yeah. The one thing I will say about that is I felt that the speaker from the IDA who was answering these questions did a really good job of defending the fundamental principles. Andre. One of the things that they said was that there would seem to be this misunderstanding that the quote-unquote pay that people would receive under the system was intended to be some kind of incentive to work. And he was just like, we don't envisage the wage for an hour's work as being an incentive to work, kind of thing. And that's a fundamental misunderstanding of, I don't know,
that kind of blew my mind.
Probably.
Yeah, and that was like Ferdia's discussion 20 minutes ago. Yeah, fascinating. And then it was just really funny because then, everybody would ask their questions and they'd answer down the line, and then it would eventually get to Nick Rogers and he'd be like, short answer, it's class war. Yeah. And I was just like, respect. Hell yeah. That's great. Short answer, I think at one point he said expropriating the bourgeoisie is the easy part. And he was just straight-faced, fully serious. And I was like, oh, that gives me hope.
Yeah.
It would be interesting to do something.
Either we do it or we don't. I mean, that's the optimism.
Yeah, exactly.
That's my optimism speaking.
Where everything falls apart. Yeah. It would be interesting to do some thinking about how labor time planning might be an emergent demand from a labor movement. Mm-hmm. I don't know if anybody has any suggestions on reading for that, but yeah, I would like that. I would like to think that. I mean, maybe just demands for directly social labor. Maybe if that comes out of a workers' movement, but yeah, workers' movement, ... question mark. We'll see. Mm-hmm. Yeah, anything else to say?
Yeah. If anybody can come up with the political slogan that we should have on our banners that advocates for an equal wage, I'd quite like to know.
We've got to find some old councilist posters from 100 years ago. Yeah, we'll see. Yeah, we didn't really talk about Aaron Benenev's panel. It was very, very good. But yeah, it was just, again, this idea of how are you going to manage the politics of this society? And he came up with a scheme for it. It was interesting. Yeah. It was just, I just don't have much to say about it. It's cool.
Magic the Gathering.
Magic the Gathering. How are you going to have your Magic the Gathering club? And everybody got mad at him for using the word stakeholders. I don't really know why. I don't really know why that was a running joke. It just seemed because I guess people hear it at their jobs and they go, I hate my middle class job where we talk about stakeholders. I don't know. What are you going to do? All right. I think that's it. Historical Materialism 2024, London. I also learned that I was reminded that I don't like London at all. Just the walk from the train station to the university where this was at. I was like, God damn it, I fucking hate this place.
The New Elizabeth line particularly dystopian.
Yes.
Really work out why.
The only Elizabeth line. Somebody called it the Lizzie line to me the other day, and I almost vomited. Anyways. Maybe we'll go to the next year's one, and it'll all be socialist planted. Nothing else.
Mm. And no academics.
No academics, yeah. Only people sneaking in. What are you going to do? All right. Thank you very much, Dan. This was very fun.
It's been fun. Yeah, in-person recording.
Yeah. We'll see what Donald Trump brings the world in the coming year. Right. Labor time planning.
Yeah.
See. All right. Bye-bye. Hey everybody, Jack here. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. The song that you heard on this episode is Music to Kill Bad People To by King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. You can go ahead and check this song out much more on their Bandcamp at kinggizzard.bandcamp.com. If you want to go ahead and get in touch with us, chat shit, tell us that we're wrong, whatever you want to do, you can go ahead and do that at auxiliarystatements@gmail.com. You can just send us a message there, or you can get in touch with us on Twitter, on Discord, on Instagram. You're a smart person. You can find these places. We got a YouTube. We post stuff there as well. Sometimes we stream. Thank you so much for listening. Till next time.